I'm pleased to testify on an IRP docket. I've long thought that integrated resource planning was one of the most important things that a commission can do, to have the utility bring their plans for their portfolio growth before the commission for review. Georgia Power is asking for approval of six PPAs that would add over 2 gigawatts of natural gas-fired capacity, both in combustion turbines and in combined cycle plants. In line with the Commission's rules, those plants were chosen after an auction process, a bidding process that was overseen by the Axion Group, of consultant who was hired to see that. And those were chosen in close cooperation with the Commission staff. You know, and I know, actually the country knows, that in recent years, Georgia has been a leader in the development of solar. The Solar Market Index, or Insight report, calculates that Georgia at the end of 2021 ranked 7th in the country with the amount of solar. I've just attached that to the handout that you've received. We're right behind Nevada and Arizona, 2 of the sunniest states in the nation. And I understand that subsequent to this publication, Georgia's moved up to spot number 5 in the country with total solar installed. With all this solar capacity, it might have surprised you, as it did surprise many in the solar industry in the state, that the bid process that I just described resulted in only gas plants. No solar showed up in that award of bids. My testimony explores why that might have happened. I will give a little background that I think will be helpful to understand that. In Colorado, the largest utility is Public Service Company of Colorado. It's a vertically integrated company, much like Georgia Power is. And like Georgia Power, it's got a mix of solar and, or actually solar, wind, and natural gas and coal on its system. Every 4 years, Public Service Company has an all-source bidding that results in the lowest prices for wind and solar anywhere in the country. After reviewing the 2019 solicit process here in Georgia, I concluded that that process is fundamentally biased against solar energy. I'm not saying that the bid evaluation was unfair. The problem occurred before the bids were judged. How the solicitation was set up, what were the rules of selection. I have concluded that, in brief, the selection of combined cycle and especially combustion turbines was preordained. And so it's not a surprise to me, given what I saw in that announcement of the bids, that natural gas was selected. I think that was an error, and I'll talk about a little bit more about that. Georgia Power uses what might be called limited source acquisition. The resources are put in silos. You've got renewable energy over here, and you've got capacity over here. And as I'll explain in just a minute, capacity ends up being essentially equal to natural gas capacity. Although solar plus storage is welcome to bid in the capacity bidding, as I will discuss, there was no real possibility of those projects winning bids. The implications of this approach can be seen in the second handout that I've given you. It shows the capacity expansion plan. It's known as MG0. You heard that discussed with the last witnesses. MG for medium gas and 0 for the cost of carbon. If you look at that chart, this is taken directly from the company's exhibits, and you see a dotted line box around a bunch of the numbers in there. The red ones are the ones that are sought for approval in this case, over 2 gigawatts. The black ones in that same dotted line box are the ones that are projected to be filled in the MG0 MG0 scenario out to 2041. Now, I just looked at it to 2036. And if you add all those numbers up, they're proposing to add 10,785 megawatts of gas before any solar is added for capacity value. As can be seen, this is a remarkable result, really. While utilities across the country are gobbling up solar plus storage to add to their dispatch stack, Georgia Power's prediction is that no solar capacity will be added before 2037. My second major concern about the IRP is the company's choice of baseline scenario. MG0 is the name of it. And with any IRP, the utility chooses a baseline and then tests sensitivities against that baseline to see how the portfolio fares, what its cost is. Stated another way, in this modeling, the exercise, the utility can reselect least cost or best cost portfolio upon a set of conditions. Georgia Power selected a scenario with two major assumptions. First, that natural gas prices will be medium. And second, that Georgia Power will not face any significant, quote, greenhouse gas pressure, that's the company's term, over its carbon emissions through 2041. This baseline scenario, called MG0, on my third handout, you'll see the MG0 case shown as the column on the left. I'll hold this up so you know which one I'm talking about. The column on the left is the MG, and you'll see it's a stack of solar and battery and combined cycle and combustion turbine with SCR and combustion turbine without SCR. If you tweak this assumption by the addition of $20 a ton for carbon, you get the scenario MG20. It's stacked next to it. In fact, you'll see this in their exhibits. This was taken directly from the company's exhibits. That one tweak comes up with a completely different least cost scenario. The amount of natural gas is dropped by to half. The battery is expanded considerably. And most importantly for us here today, the amount of solar is increased by 350%. Now that's a least cost scenario, a least cost portfolio, changing only the assumption that there is a $20 a ton pressure on the company to reduce carbon emissions. I want to emphasize that these are Georgia Power's numbers and the results of their modeling. I did not redo the modeling. I just took what was provided to us in the filing. In my view, this baseline portfolio selected by Georgia Power is very risky. What do I mean by that? If they stay with the portfolio they say they are expecting to be, MG0, and there is pressure to reduce carbon, you're going to get a higher price than you would have if you'd gone with MG20, the other scenario. Now, MG20 mostly means adding a lot of solar right now, and in order to make it effective on the system, it should be solar plus storage. We've heard that the company accords zero capacity to solar, standalone solar, and that they do not model solar plus storage at the same time. But you know that that's how developers are building their systems. These large systems have large batteries, typically equal to 1/4 to 1/2 of the capacity of the solar field. And with that, you get a firm resource. It's dispatchable. It doesn't produce in the middle of the night, but it's not needed in the middle of the night. The battery can serve to firm up the solar reserves. It can also be used to shift forward the peaking ability of the array. You can chase the winter peak a lot better if you've got a battery to serve at that point. It's not necessary for Congress or the General Assembly of Georgia to enact a $20 carbon tax. That's the scenario shorthand for pressure to decarbonize. The pressure might come from lots of places. Maybe it's not going to come from the Georgia legislature, but Georgia Power has a lot of big customers who have very solid climate commitments, and they're going to want green energy from this company. These companies all have investors, and if Georgia Power makes it onto a list of disapproved or if they make it on the list, much like the nuclear versus non-nuclear utilities were sorted out a long time ago, you may see pressure from the board of directors who want to see this company increase its share price. My conclusions: first, I think it's very likely that some of the gas generation sought for approval in this case will not be needed in a least cost scenario. I recommend that the commission hold off action on that last PPA, which is scheduled to go into service in 2028. Similarly, if the commission determines not to approve closure of one or more of those coal units, then you should strike out that amount, corresponding amount of gas capacity from the PPAs, because that won't be needed either. I think it's much more likely that more solar will be needed for capacity. And right now, in the capacity in the RFP, solar plus storage gets credit only for being a battery. So if your battery is 1/4 the size of your 600 megawatt solar project, you get 150 megawatts of credit for that project towards the company's peak demand. In fact, you can produce 600 if you've got the battery linked with the solar field. So Georgia Power needs to recharacterize solar plus storage. I also think, and this is probably, in my view, my most important recommendation, Georgia Power needs to move to an all-source solicitation, not siloed, segmented solicitations for different kinds of capacity and energy that are sorted out in an artificial way. I'm very familiar with utilities, especially Xcel Energy, who puts together a portfolio of all of these projects: solar plus storage, wind plus storage, wind without, solar without, and some gas, but not much gas. They run a completely secure, stable, and reliable system. If you have an all-source solicitation, you see all in one place these competing resources. You don't silo off natural gas capacity in an auction which was essentially skewed against the solar plus storage. It was mentioned last panel that another scenario was presented by the company, which was not actually explained much. It was called the aggressive DSM. Turns out the aggressive DSM was lower cost than the main baseline scenario that they selected. So if you needed proof that DSM, or energy efficiency, is the cheapest resource, that is a model proving it to you. Last point, and it's on my last page here. The commission needs to encourage, require, goad, I don't know how you want to do it, the company into more regional cooperation. There are assets in the region that are connected to the company that could be used to offset the rather substantial reserve capacity that you're going to ask to be approved, you're going to be asked to approve in this case. That's the summary of my testimony. I look forward to the commission's questions and any questions from other parties.
Chairman Podmore, I'd ask that Mr. Binz' pre-file testimony be copied into the record as if read, and also that his 3 pre-filed exhibits be identified as South Face / SACE exhibits 1 through 3, and his demonstrative exhibit be identified for the record as South Face SACE exhibit 4.
So moved, so marked.
Thank you. Mr. Binz is available for cross-examination and questions from the commission.
Questions from commissioners? Okay. Yes, I would. You may approach. All right. Georgia Public Service Commission. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, Mr. Binz. It's great seeing you again.
Good to see you, Mr. Walsh. He and I last crossed paths 20 years ago.
It has been a while.
You were 12.
May refer you please to page 20 of your direct testimony. Okay. I'm going to direct you to your first Q&A on the page. The answer begins on line. Actually, I'm sorry. I'm going to move to the second Q&A on the page. The answer begins on line 14, but I wanted to direct your attention specifically to the sentence beginning on line 16, where you state, to emphasize this value is used as input resource modeling. It is not simply added to the cost of power. Colorado uses a price of $47 per ton. New York uses $51 per ton. And then you mentioned some other states as well. What difference does it make on the ultimate decision as to which resource mix to approve to use this value as an input in the modeling versus adding it to the cost of power?
If you add this to the modeling, it steers you towards a portfolio which is going to be different than that which you would have gotten had you not added it. That portfolio need not be $47 a ton or the equivalent megawatt hours. It need not be that much more expensive, but it qualifies lower cost, particularly in this era, renewable resources for selection.
Was the $47 per ton you mentioned ordered by the Colorado Public Utility Commission?
It's actually ordered by the legislature.
So it was mandated, that specific amount, by the legislature?
No, it's tied to a national figure called the social cost of carbon, which today I believe is $51. Actually, there's news on that front. The Supreme Court just permitted the EPA and other federal agencies to begin using $51. This was today's ruling by the Supreme Court, reinstating those federal agencies' ability to use that number as the cost of carbon.
Is that a dollar per ton amount something that escalates over time?
It does.
Does your testimony address whether increasing the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and other pollutants impact health and climate?
I did not address that.
Do you believe that externalities are appropriately considered in the consideration of supply side as well as demand side options?
I did not address that. In general, I do. I was chairman of the commission for 4 years. We grappled with that extensively, and I was in support of most of those most of those moves towards the use of externalities.
I'd like to now ask you a few questions about utility-owned generation testimony that in part is on page 41 of your pre-filed direct.
I'm there.
Beginning on line 6 of your testimony, you testify about the challenges created by the reliance on rate-based growth for earnings growth. Is that a fair characterization of your testimony?
Yes.
Is it your concern that such reliance might lead to a preference for utility-owned solutions even when lower cost solutions might be available from other providers?
I think that's what happened here.
Do you recommend in your testimony any minimum percentage of utility power generation assets?
No, and I'll tell you what we did in Colorado. We had a rule of thumb that the utility got about 40% of the amount of capacity sought. We tried and usually succeeded in squaring that with the auction, but we understood there were advantages to consumers and the system to have the utility own some of it, but there were offsetting reasons why to limit the utility's ownership of assets. And so we did a 40-60 split for the most part. That was at least the target.
Would you be concerned for any reliability issues if the percentage of utility-owned generation dropped below a certain threshold?
I don't think so. That's essentially what happens in RTOs. In the north, the PJM is probably the best example. Very secure, very stable, largest, they like to brag they're the largest machine in the world. And that's exactly what it is. There's no ownership by utilities in PJM, at least nothing that would invite the kind of concerns that I expressed in this paragraph. So the answer to your question, long way around, sorry, is no, I'm not that concerned about reliability. If you've built a portfolio of credit-worthy companies owning important facilities that are up to date and properly dispatched by the utility, that's also important.
So if performance from the independent power producers was required for a contract, you wouldn't have any concerns about reliability or other concerns if a lot of the contracts were breached?
All at once?
Well, perhaps not all at once, but over a period of time.
Sure, that could happen. I mean, I can't prove that that could never happen. But contracts have their own remedies, as we know. And you've got other things called reserve margins, which are an attempt to buffer against that kind of a shock to the system. Utilities lose plants too. I worked in a case in Utah where a turbine got wrecked by a wrench dropped into the turbine blades. When it started up, we had a mess. That was 400 megawatts in Utah that was not available. So I'm not going to claim utilities are not careful and they're guardians of public interest. I fully support their participation in the generation markets. But this is a changing world, changing technologies, and I think we have to accommodate the realities of other resources than just traditional utility resources.
But you did testify earlier, outside of perhaps not reliability concerns, but you did think that there was a benefit to having some minimum percentage of utility-owned generation.
There's a political benefit, if that's what you're looking for.
I wasn't looking for a particular benefit. I thought you said there was a rule of thumb of 40%.
That's what we used in Colorado. I couldn't prove that that was optimal or anything like that. It was politically feasible. It's something utility would accept. It's something our friends across the way in the General Assembly would accept. And I thought it generally smacked of a very fair solution. So that's why we adopted it and went with it several times.
Other than political, you don't think there's any benefit to a minimum percentage of utility-owned generation?
Not in the terms we're using. Again, there are plenty of utilities which don't own anything in terms of generation. There's a lot of distribution companies, probably some in this state, which don't own any generation. They do fine through contracts with their suppliers who may or may not be utilities themselves. So again, I think that commission regulation is the art of the possible, like a lot of other political endeavors. And you try and come up with solutions which have broad acceptance and protect the public interest. And I think a solution of if you want to say a utility 40% minimum is something this commission wants to adhere to, I think that's fine. I think you'll get good results if you regulate closely and regulate well. I think you could do it at a different percentage as well.
You estimate that the I'm sorry, let me start over. You state in your testimony that the 100 megawatt minimum bid in the 2022 to 2028 capacity RFP had the effect of removing an estimated 74 solar projects from contention. How is that number estimated?
From the connection queue, the interconnection queue. I just went through and counted the projects below 100 megawatts that were in that queue. There's a lot of movement in that queue because some of them drop out and it becomes solar plus storage. So you've got some motion, but I think 74 is about the right number.
So were there 74 in the queue that were below 100 megawatts, and you assumed each of them then was eliminated?
Yes. Okay. From the capacity option.
Right.
Yes.
Could you refer to page 20 of your testimony at the top of the page?
Okay.
You say it's risky for Georgia Power to adopt a medium gas price zero carbon cost case because of the U.S. emphasis on decarbonization and the reduction of CO2 pollution. You also say that Georgia Power consumers are at risk of higher costs if the future turns out to be different than a $0 carbon price. Is that fair?
That's right.
Would you agree that consumers are at risk of higher costs if the future carbon price is different from what is assumed for planning purposes? In this case, regardless of whether it's higher or lower than what was assumed?
I think that's right. Yes.
Okay. That's all the questions I had. Thank you very much, Mr. Binz. Madam Chair, thank you. That's all the questions I had.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. George Power.
Hi, Mr. Binz. Steve Hewitson on behalf of Georgia Power. Is it your opinion that this commission should encourage, or I think the word you used was goad, Georgia Power into becoming part of an OTO?
No, I didn't say that. Very carefully didn't say that.
Okay.
I think there are.
Go ahead.
I do not say that.
Okay. Do you think that that is something that would be beneficial in your view if Georgia Power became part of a regional transmission organization?
I don't know.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Binz.
Redirect.
Mr. Binz, just for clarification, what is your opinion about utility reliability, utility service reliability?
Well, it's
Is that a priority? That
a
should
very high priority. At the risk of being slightly offensive, it's the old story of what's the rule at a hospital for dropping babies. It's 0. You don't drop babies. You don't let your grid go down. So 1 in 10 was the expression used earlier today. I think that's the kind of statistic you want to go for in operation of the grid.
All right, thank you. And Mr. Walsh just asked you a question about the minimum bid in the last RFP. If this commission's goals and the company's goals are to encourage in the next RFP bids for new projects in North Georgia, would it assist, would it make it easier and have generate more interest if the size of the projects were smaller than 100 megawatts, especially for a North Georgia type project?
I would assume so, yes.
And that do you think that would encourage more bids to be submitted into the RFP?
Arithmetically, it would, yes.
All
Does
right.
that make sense?
It does make sense.
That come from the mountain experience of Colorado.
That's right. That's right.
Thank you, Mr. Binz, for your testimony today. Chairman Pridemore, could I ask that Mr. Binz' pre-file testimony exhibits be entered into the record and that he be excused?
Yes, so moved, so marked. Witnesses are excused.
All right. Now
You guys have a good Memorial Day weekend.
thank you. Well, now I have Dr. Brown.
Okay,
And I,
Well-
and I have Mr.
sorry about that, Dr. Brown.
Dr. Brown wants to testify too. All right, Dr. Brown, you're sworn in. Let me ask you, did you cause